Welcome to Middle Fingers Up. I'm your host, Kieran, and today we are talking about grief. And if you're wondering, gosh, Kieran, you're always talking about grief here. Good observation. Thanks for bringing it up. We are. And I just want to take a moment and say we have a lot of conversations about grief here on MFU, and we do it with intention and purpose. And here's why. Because we see grief as a relationship that we're building, and it's not a problem to fix or something that eventually just disappears. It moves with us, it changes shape, and it continues to teach us. So grief can come from loss, the loss of a loved one, the loss of time, the loss of who we were in a certain chapter, and even the loss of who we thought and how we thought life would go. But I guess even when those things are gone, we're not, and we're still here. And grief will continue to show up while we are still here. It'll show up in the way we love. It'll show up in the way we parent. It'll show up in the way we pause when an old photo reminds us of that time with that person, or it'll show up when a song hits differently. And I think that's why we keep talking about grief. That's why we keep exploring the different angles. That's why we feel repetition is important, because grief is not just about what ended. It's also about what remains. And in sharing how it lives in us, maybe we can learn to carry it with a little more grace. And today we're continuing this conversation with someone I love a lot. And I know you guys had a lot to say after she was on episode 128, and she had named it Give Yourself Grace. Reshma shared her journey after losing her husband to suicide and how she had been navigating the loss of her husband alongside her 3 children, and also finding her way back to herself. Today, actually, before I even get into today, I just want to remind you, Reshma is a mindfulness coach. Through her lived experience with loss, she's been helping others navigate grief through mindful healing. And most recently, she has completed her, I guess I'm going to say trauma-informed yoga certificate, but I know she'll speak to that in a little bit too. And so today we're hoping that we can share a little conversation with you all about how that relationship with grief evolves, how it shows up differently for different genders, for men, for women, and how it hits South Asian women who are trying to break generational cycles, and how many of us have been taught about what grief's been about. And then I feel most importantly, what it means to raise children in this new awareness, in this cycle breaking era that we're all in. So take a breath, settle in. Don't leave just because you're hearing another conversation about grief. Show up today with what is it about grief that gets you? Show up with curiosity, show up with your own questions. Let's get into it. Welcome, Reshma. How are you today?
I'm good, thanks. Thank you so much. That was such a beautiful message about grief and what it means and how it changes. So I appreciate that.
Shall we get into it?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so last time you shared your story of loss, of love, and grace. How are you arriving today? Like, what's going on in your world today since the last time we spoke?
Oh, yeah. I'm arriving probably a lot more settled and more sure of myself and my purpose and my direction. And like you mentioned earlier, I just finished my 200-hour yoga teacher training program here in Irvine. And I'm trauma informed. That certificate I got earlier in the year. And I'm also certified to teach kids. So I feel like at this point, not just lived experience helps my work, but now I have all the training behind it too. So that's been really special to see. And I mean, I'm proud of myself because that was hard. 7 months of training. I was gone 1 to 2 weekends a month. Gone meaning I was in town, but I was at the studio both Saturday and Sunday. Had to rely on my parents to help out. My kids had to step it up at home, and it worked out. And I'm so relieved and grateful for just, having the opportunity and having the support around me.
I'm so excited for you too. I know you were sharing on socials when you were in training, and probably for me the most exciting part was to have a South Asian woman going through the training and coming out as a yoga instructor. Oddly enough, we don't see enough of
Mhm.
people like you and I running those classes. And I think a lot of our community has been questioning why and what that's about, as the Western world has sold this concept of yoga to us. So thank you for going and completing that for us, as well as the part about teaching kids at a young age how to move and how to connect body and mind. I think huge, and just stretching, and the longevity and when it comes to health as we become adults. And usually it's not a workout we need, it's a stretch that we
Yeah.
need. So I
Mhm.
think getting that going early on and preparing kids for this life that is going to bring grief, it's going to bring loss, it's going to bring some tough times, and how can they stay connected to their mind and body is so amazing. Any feedback that's sort of come out of the training? Any interesting facts or findings about yoga and kids that maybe people listening and part of this conversation today wouldn't know about?
Yeah, I think just generally speaking, yoga is so much more than the asanas, the movement, the poses. And going into it, I didn't even realize how little we'd focus on the actual movement. Yoga is so much more about our breath and our life force, our life energy within us, and expanding that within us, and learning how to turn off the senses from the external to really tap into the internal. So I think everybody should do a 200-hour training, whether you plan on teaching or not. I learned so much. I've seen such a huge difference in myself. My family has seen it. I think my kids are benefiting from a lot of the things that I share with them about the philosophy. And yeah, in terms of kids yoga, I think some people think that kids yoga means their child is going to be doing a 1 hour vinyasa. And then they think, well, my kid's not going to be able to do that. So I'm not signing them up, or I'm not putting them in yoga. And it's not that at all. I'll do an hour with kids and we might do 3 or 4 poses. We might do child's pose for rest. We might do tree pose for balance. And then we might play a game where we dance and freeze and do a pose. It's very little focus on the actual asanas. And it's more about, just like you said, connecting mind, body, heart through the use of our breath, like learning how to use our breath to bring our minds back to the present moment and to check in with ourselves, with our feelings, how it's showing up in our body. So far, the few families who have trusted me with their children have seen the benefits of it. I have a family who signed up 2 girls because one of their daughters has a hard time expressing herself. And they've seen that after our sessions, she's a lot lighter and starts talking a little bit more. She shares a lot in our group, which her parents are surprised about. So yeah, I think it's something that kids should have access to from a very young age. I think that there was a quote, I think by Dalai Lama, if every 8-year-old learns how to meditate, we would create so much more world peace. And I think it's true. It's hard, but it's available. So why not?
Hmm. I think everything you said was so well said because it's true. It's so true. If we start them young, who knows where that's going to take them as they get older, as life gets tougher, as they hit breakups, they have exams, they have all these overstimulation, stressors, anxiety, all these things that everyone is impacted by at some point in their life, if not for the trajectory of their lifespan. And I think the nervous system is so underestimated, and it's like the call center, it's the hub, it's the main squeeze of everything that we operate off of, yet it's often the last thing on our mind about, am I regulated today? Like even the
Mhm.
basics of, I didn't sleep well last night. I didn't eat. I didn't get my exercise. I did, so meaning as in even movement, what's that going to mean for me throughout the day? And am I preparing for the evening when I'm going to come home from work and be around my family? And I think we just get, and I don't know if it's we allow or we've been conditioned. We can say it however, because everyone's got a different story, but we've just put so much of that on the back burner, and then we're going and going and going, and all of that is impacted through addictions, through violence, through all these things
Mhm.
that we're like, oh, why is that person more violent than the other person? And I just think if we pause for a moment and go back to the basics, I agree with you. There's so much that we as adults, so much our kids would gain if we would just take that time for ourselves, and
Yeah.
doing the most simplest basic thing of morning yoga, whatever it is, just movement, and understanding how that nervous system impacts how we move throughout the world. I'm going to see the world very differently today if I didn't get that rest, and I'm dysregulated and my cortisol levels are through the roof, than maybe when I'm balanced.
Yeah. And I think you said it so truly that we don't give ourselves enough time to pause. I think that it's in the transitions that we're able to heal.
Hmm.
And I say that because I myself have noticed that I can go. And then when I go to my room and take a break, turn on some meditation music and just let myself feel, I more often than not will cry.
Yeah.
And it's release. It is release. People try to stop themselves from crying, but it's the most natural way to release emotion. Movement moves the energy of emotion, which is great, but to really like release, your your body does it through tears. And I've noticed that about myself. And so I really believe that we need more time to just sit with our feelings and to just be still.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's I mean, a shavasana is always one of the toughest poses, even if you just look at that with yoga, and people think, "Oh, yeah." When we first start, we're like, "Oh, I can't wait to just lay there." But then it's like, try not to itch that scratch, or scratch that itch, or however you say
Mhm.
it. Try not to adjust the clothes or wipe the sweat, or these little things that get in the way of us to just be still. And that carries through, yeah, the day, where
Mhm.
distractions and life happens and whatnot. And fine, it's not possible every day for whatever reason, but at some point in the day, can we take a minute for ourselves and say, okay, like, what's going on for me? Where am I at? How am I responding to all of these things? What do I need? How is my environment impacting me? Like all these sorts of things that help us feel more successful and prevent accidents, prevent those silly arguments with our family members, and
Mhm.
or overspending, and the things that we end up doing to cope, using substances, having that glass of wine and that bottle. Then that, for me, it was smoking weed, right? Like you have a joint, but it's like literally all day every day, and where does it end? And these sorts of things start to add up, and I think it's because we're supplementing and we're trying to take the shortcut. to get to wherever it is we're all trying to get to. And I think in a little bit, there was a couple of interesting studies that I was in preparation for our talk today. I was reading just about what happens when we connect mental health and grief and loss, and where we need to sort of shift as a community, as a society. So, but we'll get into that in a little minute, in a little while. So, last time we talked about your experience in the loss of your husband with your kids, and you hadn't done this program with the yoga training yet. And
Mhm.
so I'm curious about, for you, and we're talking about the relationship of grief, it's evolving, and so how you are today with grief would be different than a few months
Mhm.
ago, a few years ago. So I'm just curious for you, like, what is something since this training, since this last little while, that you have learned about your relationship with grief that you maybe didn't know until recently, or didn't discover till recently?
I think this is something that I've always known, but I think the training has just reminded me that a lot of my grief is just going to be with me. I can't control it. I can't fix it, and I shouldn't let it define me. So, in other words, I shouldn't judge it. Just let it be. And I think that I've, over the last 7 months, just learned even more so how to give myself grace and to be gentle with myself when I'm not living perfectly. And I understand there's no such thing as perfect, but you want everything to, especially as moms, just in general, whether you're grieving or not, you want everything to be lined up. You want your kids to be 100% okay. You want the house to look presentable at all times. You want them to eat really well all the time. It's just all of that I'm trying to do as a mom. And then you throw grief into the mix, and that just takes the stress and the pressure to another level. And I think that I've just learned even more so that all of that is really out of my control. And it's just about my children being happy and healthy, and I need to trust more. So there's
Mm.
part of the 8 limb path in yoga is called Kriya Yoga, and it's the yoga of discipline, of refinement. And so the first step is noticing and making a choice to refine. The next step is to reflect. And then the last step is to surrender. And the surrender part is what has always been hard for me. In fact, that was my word for the year. And even then, we're like at the end of the year now, and I'm still having a hard time with that. So, my yoga training really helped remind me of that process
I
of
love that.
surrendering.
Surrender. Like, what would you say is the thing that gets in the way of allowing yourself to surrender? Or maybe for you, maybe in general, for many of us.
It's fear.
Mhm.
It's like being able to say and actually believe that as long as you're doing the work and you're leading with heart and you're trusting it's going to be okay, that's hard. That's hard to believe. But I know that when I do get to that place, I mean, I write intentions every morning when I journal. And if I look at journals from a year ago, 2 years ago, even the months after Sean died, I can see so many things that came to fruition, because I was writing them down and I was just continuing to do what I do and
Yeah.
trusting. But we always need reminders because it's human to fear, to feel panic, and to question the unknown. But it does usually work out. We'll all be okay if we just do the inner work.
Yeah, the thing that we're trying to control the most, it's like we the outcome, which we have zero control over, but if we take the steps and do the things leading up to it, maybe we can be as close to the outcome, or feel okay at one of it is what it is. I did. It's like preparing for an exam. If all
Mhm.
you can do is study to the best of your knowledge, and then whatever happens
Mhm.
happens on exam day. And I think that's sort of life, where we show up to write this exam of life, and we're trying to get a perfect score, we're trying to do all these things, but there's all these other things that we could have been doing along the way that would have helped us manage. And we're always putting the cart before the horse, I think, as humans, for some reason, instead of going along. And you mentioned the piece about parenting, and I'm curious, and I this is how I was last time too, about the kids, and we talked a lot about the
Yeah.
sibling relationship and the kids. And I've also noticed you are doing a fantastic job allowing tidbits and little sound bites of how the kids are coping when you share their voice on your socials, which I think is really powerful. We hear how you're processing, and I think it's helpful to see it, how you as a family unit are working through this. Everyone's got a different sort of way to go about it. Your kids are at different developmental stages. Even genders play a part. And so if you're okay, I'd love to chat a little bit about what you're noticing and the difference between raising your son who's going through grief and then raising your daughters who are going through it. And the added piece with your daughters is they're the future, you're the past, when you think of how we're breaking these barriers as South Asian women. And so
Mhm.
I'm very, very curious about how that's going in your home. So have you been observing? I'm imagining you are. What have you been maybe seeing when you're observing the relationship between the three of them as siblings, managing and coping?
Yeah. Well, I want to touch on just thank you very much for following and listening to their words and for the praise. I really appreciate that. And I wanted to point out that November is Children's Grief Awareness Month. So I have been very intentional about what we're sharing so that it does help other families who are grieving loss or change, transition, and having a hard time. I think a lot of times parents look at others, and I mean, we all do, right? We look at social media and then we think, why aren't we like that? Or, oh, wait, why isn't my child like that? And so I've actually really liked that each of my kids is so different in the way they speak, they grieve, they express their feelings. And it shows people who are following me that you might see my middle child who has really just been like she's the I don't want to say the good one, but she's the least difficult one to parent. And so some might see her and think, wow, she's so well spoken and even keeled and really has it together. But then there's my older one, my son, who expresses his grief and anger. And I get the calls from school about him, and he's the one who gets distracted by his feelings and feels unmotivated, right? And the younger one is all over the place. So I've liked that. I've had a couple people, they might see one child and then they'll reach out to me and say, "Oh my gosh, I wish my daughter would speak more. She's not speaking much about her loss." And then I can say, "Well, here, I have another kid who's like yours, you know?"
Yeah.
What I've seen in them is, like I said, they grieve differently. Their healing modalities are different. The ones that they choose for themselves are different. How they show and share is different. But I think what has helped everybody across the board is just being present. Like what helps them, what they benefit from in our home is my presence, my love, and my support. And I am not a perfect parent. I wasn't before I lost Sean, and I'm definitely not one now. I forget things, I miss emails. I mean, it's hard. I'm a solo parent with three kids who are very busy. And so even then, my kids give me grace.
Mhm.
And I love that because I give them grace all the time. But I know because they tell me, it's okay, mom. I know you can't make it to this thing because you have to do this for the girls or the other ones, but I know you'll be at the next one.
Yeah.
And that takes so much pressure off myself because otherwise I would be trying to get everywhere and I would just be unhappy at the end of it. So I think they're doing well. It's not easy. It can get messy sometimes, but I think they are continuing to heal and they're starting to feel more comfortable in their story,
Mm.
in their loss, in what happened, and in sharing. I think my son had said recently, I'm more comfortable sharing about what happened because I've told the story now over and over and over.
Yeah, and I would imagine that's like a parallel process for you as well.
Mhm,
And I even remember the last time when we had spoken about this, you had gone through the process of walking through the steps. And we, when we have something traumatic happen, we flee from it. We're like, oh, I can't. And you intentionally went through that so that you can be where you are today and
mhm,
have a different relationship with it. And that takes a lot. And good for your son too, to recognize, okay, the more I'm talking about this, I'm realizing my relationship with the loss of my dad is changing. And I was reading like a little article about children's trajectories with grief after parental loss, and literally, like, you just explained the whole study and your approach. This study followed children from the ages of 8 to 15, or 8 to 16, who lost a parent, and then they tracked them for several years to understand how grief evolved during their developmental phases, as they were dealing with the death, and so what emotional support looked like after the loss of this parent. And what they found were four sort of main patterns: resilience, recovery, chronic, and high chronic. So kids who lost a parent to suicide were in the chronic to high chronic care
mhm,
category, and they were subject to show prolonged distress, self-blame, the fear of further loss. And I know you've talked about this on your socials too, like, I'm the only parent now, and this fear of, I got to do whatever I can to not leave them, and the kids feel that too. And
mhm,
the biggest thing that they noticed for these kids in the high chronic and chronic categories, like your kids would be, was, okay, look, traumatic events happen to every single person. And when we're talking about kids, it's it's not necessarily the event itself, it's what happens after.
mhm,
And you talked about this in the last episode of, like, I needed to deal with my stuff so that
mhm,
I can help my kids, because it mattered. Even what and how they learned about the loss of their dad, all of that was going to carry throughout their healing journey. And so these protective factors, like open family communication, cultural context that allows expression. So getting the calls from school with your son, okay, every parent doesn't want that. My kids have not had a traumatic event, and I get calls, so I can connect on that level. But for you, like, you're using the word grace in your home, so we have to allow these moments of expression, and maybe they're not the best, but they have to carry out so that we can teach and he can learn that, okay, this can't be our pattern where we're always going to anger, aggression, like, but
mhm.
clearly we're in this spot, we got to work through this, let's talk it out and all that. And so you allowing that expression was one of the biggest protective factors in this article. And then obviously the early therapeutic support as well as peer support. And so I'm curious if you can speak to that, because I see that from where I sit, and in your own home what of that you're applying, what maybe other things that I didn't mention, that the article didn't mention, that you're doing in the home, that's allowing this space for your kids to go through their relationship with the loss of their dad.
Yeah, it makes me think of the first book I read after Sean passed away, and that was The Body Keeps a Score.
Yes.
And so it talks a lot about childhood trauma and how it shows up in the body in adults who don't don't take care of themselves, don't face that trauma. And there are so many things in that book that I found fascinating, but I remember really holding on to reading about what children need more than even love, and that is safety.
Bingo.
And it
Yes.
means, yeah, it means not just feeling physically safe, but feeling emotionally safe. And in our culture in South Asian communities, we didn't grow up like that. I, I have very wonderful parents and we grew up in a really happy home, but did I feel emotionally safe to share what I was truly feeling throughout, definitely throughout high school? No. And I know that even before Sean died, I wanted to change that way of parenting for my kids. And then after he died, it was even more important to let them express themselves and to let them show all sides of what they're feeling in their own grief journey. And some of those emotions are not pretty, like anger, like I mentioned
Yeah.
with my son, jealousy,
Mhm.
comparison, fear, like all those things that come up for us are things we're not really proud of and we feel lonely in. And I've just taught my kids that it's okay to feel any of that. And I think the way I've done it is not just by letting them share in the house, but I've shown them how I feel and I've talked about how I feel. And I have said that I get jealous sometimes when I see families together. It's hard for me to go out in a group of women and hear them talk about their husbands. It's hard to, at the holidays especially, be
Mm.
around all our family and everybody has a dad who's taking part in everything. And I tell the kids that.
Yeah.
And when my son is angry and yelling in the home, I let him do that. I remind him that he has to be kind and respectful. I also remind him that this is where he can do it because then on the outside you don't get to do that. And so I think that's what's really helped with
Yeah.
with them.
Yeah, what I hear you talking about is, like you said, in a lot of our homes, but our experiences in our South Asian homes, there's so much of that emotional restraint. And I think it's different when it's reinforced with boys. And so there's that be a man without really teaching
Mhm.
the boys how to be a man. And it ends up being puff your chest and how much more can you drink and how do you drive and all these scary kind of things that I grew up seeing boys, and a lot of us can say that we grew up and seeing how our young brown boys grew up as men, and a lot of them would say, the connection to addiction and these kinds of things. And I see what you're doing. You're trying to break those barriers and change up those norms. What do you think about as a South Asian mom to a South Asian son who is in this very vulnerable developmental period as an early teen, and a lot of role modeling comes from a dad or a man, and you're trying to do what you can, and I'm sure he has family around, other friends or what, but like you said, you guys are missing that presence. What comes up for you and him when you're working through some of that, and how do you two combat that together?
Yeah, I just got goosebumps because this has been something that's been on my mind a lot lately. And in fact, I talked to his therapist about this yesterday because my son has my dad and my brother, but my dad and my brother are very soft and gentle, and they're more like they're creatives, right? And Sean was very manly and outgoing and adventurous and did all the things that I know my son really wants to do. And so I'm having a hard time right now. I'm having a hard time helping him feel connected to a male figure. And even last week he broke down one night and said, I just don't connect with you and my sisters. In fact, he said, you guys are so weird. And you don't do anything I want to do. And mom, when was the last time you kicked the soccer ball around with me? And I have done that with him because I've felt so bad, but I've had knee surgeries. I can't do a lot with him. And
Yeah.
I'm also not as powerful as he is. And so, yeah, it's been hard. I'm fortunate to have some strong non-family male figures in his life and in my world. His soccer coaches and trainers, they've been really great, and they know what he's been through, and I keep them kind of up to date on where he's at, along with his school and his therapist. And so that actually brings up a really good point that I want to share for families who are grieving and don't know how to advocate for their children. I think the most important thing is to be honest, not just with the children, but with the world that you live in. I made the mistake when we moved to California from Washington State of letting my kids decide whether or not I shared with their school. And that first year of school here, my son had a really hard time and he was acting out in class around the 1 year mark of Sean's death
Mm.
in September, which is early in the school year. And so I had to meet with the school counselor. He had altercations with some kids, and then he just kind of lost control. And when I told her our history, she said, and I said, I should have told you. I didn't realize it was going to come up this way or show up this way. And she said, yeah, you should have shared, because we would have really like been there and had support in place from day one.
Yeah.
And since that time, I've never not shared now, because that's been so important. I don't want to go through that again.
Yeah.
So just sharing and connecting with our community has given him the extra support and connection that he's been missing out on. But I don't think he'll ever feel that again. I can't even say I think, I know he'll never feel that connection again
Yeah.
that he did with dad, right?
Oh, I appreciate you sharing that. And like, I'm always so grateful for how vulnerable you are with, look, this is the way it is. You're not sugarcoating it. You're not making it look pretty and wrapping it in a bow of like, you're truly, truly role modeling that it is a relationship. And
Mhm.
there's going to be good days and not so good days, and days where you're like, I don't even know what to do with this relationship. And that's the good, bad, and ugly of grief. It's like you don't know sometimes until you're there. And that's why, like you were saying earlier with your yoga training, that's why having some coping mechanisms there available to us for those, especially those times where we're like, I don't know what to do, at least we can go rely on these healthy measures that keep the nervous system calm and or back to regulation, so that we can figure those things out. And if we're operating at the back of the brain, the crisis brain, then we're not able to get to where we need to be, which is that prefrontal area of plan, organizing, logical thinking and all that. And I think when we have, and going back to me saying, yes, we're going to keep talking about grief, because when we have these conversations, I think it's resources, it's our own stats of how can we manage when someone like you who's experiencing it coming on saying, look, this is a reality for us. And I was saying this to you earlier, like there was this little policy paper that argues, and it was set for Canada, UK, and Australia, grief as a public health issue. So you and I come from a community where collective approach is often the way it goes. However, it's a double-edged sword, because a lot of our households are all about the silence part and just dealing with it on its own. But the policy is asking for healthcare systems to understand that we can't treat grief as an individual matter. And if you're a therapist, if you're in the medical world, we have to look at outside of the person, and where's the collective, the strength, the people, the community, because that's the only way that you are going to get through something so traumatic like a loss, a particular loss of a loved one. And I love that you're learning and you're sharing that, yeah, like sharing what's happening in your kids' school, recreational activities, your family, all of that provides a consistent safety, as you said, which is a number one thing that comes before the love. And if
Mhm.
your child has an outlet, like a coach at soccer or feeling there's a comfortable person at school in the day that they can go to, that's going to help their process of working through. And you can't do it all. Like, your
Mhm.
mom, and you still have to get mad at you didn't do the chores and the things that our kids, don't like us for, and you can't be the one person. And so I think you should feel really good about the fact that you're leaning on other people and other parts of the community in the best interest of your kids. And I appreciate you sharing that. Yeah, okay, fine. You didn't know that. Many of us wouldn't think to, you know,
Mhm.
update the school and these kinds of things. I think the kids probably the busiest part of their day, and the thinking and the level of awakeness, all of that is happening while they're at school when we're not there. And so it when you talk about it, yeah, it totally makes sense that we'd say, hey, school, by the way, we had a rough night, or this is what our journey in our household is. So since sharing that, do you feel that, or would he say, your son say, that that's been helpful for him, that he has people at school that are there for him? Or does he feel like people look at him different now?
Mhm.
And
No, I think they're happy that I've shared. And now he's in a new school, middle school. And well, he's in the second of the 2 years that middle school holds here. So yeah, he's happy. And it's also because I've shared that with the school, the mental health counselor and another counselor are really good about checking in with him. And then at the school this year, they started a boys group.
oh,
The counselor's office started a boys group. And so he's part of a boys group that meets on Thursdays to talk about what they're going through and to learn about coping mechanisms and share if they want and just feel like, okay, there's a group of us who are going through something right now.
yeah,
So yeah, I think he's really happy right now with the amount of support that he's getting at home with family and at school and in sports. I mean, he's basically covered. Like every step he takes throughout his day, it's like there's somebody there,
yeah,
you know?
yeah,
He's
yeah,
got like personal cheerleaders
yeah.
walking him through the day. So, yeah,
Oh,
I'm really grateful.
yeah, that's amazing. And I appreciate, please tell him I appreciate his voice, like a teenage boy, and South Asian, biracial, like all these different intersections that he brings to the table. A brother of two sisters, so he's also, like unlearning the whole misogyny, patriarchy, like all the things that, as you said, we grew up not having awareness of,
Mhm.
and we saw our brothers, our sisters, all of us grow up in these worlds, in these boxes. And that brings me to you. Like, you are doing this work as a South Asian, trying to break the barriers of keep it quiet. You're doing the complete opposite. And then you're also raising, you're like the future to other young South Asian women in your household who are growing up in a very different context than maybe you or I did, which is you don't talk about it. And, being a good girl means you follow along, and
Mhm.
your emotions are timid and cute and quiet. Your daughters are getting to grow in their own kind of way. So what's that been like for you to break these barriers, not only for you, but also open doors for them as they're going through their grief process?
Yeah, it's been interesting. I feel like I parent my girls in a way that I wish I had been parented. So it wasn't until recently that I've really become comfortable in my own self and with my voice. And I truly trust that my voice is valuable and it should be heard. And as long as I'm leading with heart, the words will come and the message will come across and it'll be and then by the time it's like surrender, right? By the
Yeah.
time you get your message out there, people are going to like what you have to say and people are not going to like what you have to say no matter what you say. So I kind of parent them that in that way. I teach my girls how to set boundaries with people, how to advocate for themselves. My youngest had been she was being bullied for a while at school, and I taught her how to speak up for herself. And you give someone another chance, but then if it happens again, you have to start setting some boundaries. You need to go ask for help. And so she's watched that whole process. And I think what helps is that maybe it's because they're always with me. They always know what I'm doing and how I'm handling things. And if I'm writing an email out to their teacher, they're either hovering over my shoulder and reading it, or I'm saying that this is what I'm saying. And I just don't remember that involvement when I was growing up.
Yeah.
Right. So,
Yeah.
like, if there was an issue, and there were when I was growing up, like, I
Hmm.
had kids bullying me, and my mom had to go talk to the principal, but I was never involved. So, even to this day, I don't know how my mom and dad handled things to advocate for me and my brother.
Yeah.
And my kids see, and I talk to them. If they have a problem, we talk about it before I just go rush off to call someone.
Yeah.
And I think that makes a difference, because we all know that your words have power, but when it comes to raising children, your actions have even more power, right?
Yeah.
They are watching us. We're modeling behavior for them all the time. And so I think that has helped the girls. And I'm very honest with them about the way their dad was. Sean was a wonderful husband and father, but not always. And I know now where it came from, the mental health challenges. And so not, they grew up seeing treatment between of women by a man in not a way that I want them to think is normal or okay. And I know I'm not being very eloquent there. I'm just trying to get the thought out. But
No, I know. You're talking
uh,
about misogyny, and you're talking
yeah,
about this patriarchy, and sometimes we feel like we're letting our partners down or the men in our lives down when we openly talk about it, because we also see the great sides and, them trying to make the efforts in these things. But like, they're also raised in the era where that is how it was translated over to us and our mothers and everything. And I think, like, that's got to be challenging. And you don't want to speak ill of their father who's no longer here, but at the same
mhm,
time, are these things that you would have shared with them at some point, regardless, as they're going to start dating and meeting, partners of their own. And so it's like, it's complicated, but it's
yeah,
also necessary, because you have to think about them, and
mhm,
like you said, the resources that we weren't given or weren't really acknowledged, and we're
yeah.
learning it the hard way as we get older. And don't you find that exhausting sometimes? Like, you're parenting little Reshma at the same time you're parenting your kids, when you're breaking these barriers, like, oh, I guess I should go talk to little me and say, you didn't get this thing that I'm giving my daughters, so you're
Yeah,
okay over here. I'm giving it to you now by giving it to them, and it's liberating and it's exhausting. And you're like, because a lot of times, for us, we're doing something for the first time in the world of parenting, if it hasn't been done with or for us. And so it's
mhm,
so surreal sometimes.
yeah. It's surreal, it's exhausting, but it's also empowering,
Yeah.
to think that, okay, well, now this is how I'm living my life. I am protecting my peace. I am setting boundaries. I do feel comfortable saying no. I'm fine with taking breaks and resting. And while I do that, I'm teaching my kids to do that too. So there's a lot of power in that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like rebellion, right? When it comes to thinking of rest. And sometimes I see my teenager with the blanket on the couch, half nap, half watching something, and there's this part of me that's like, you got to go get up and do something, and you can't be lazy. And then there's that other part of me that's like, oh no, that's just the dialogue that you grew up with, and society has taught us as well, that you got to be productive and go and go. And he's being so productive by giving himself time to just chill. And he
Yeah.
should, he's likely processing his weekend and his interactions and whatever is going through his mind, and he needs that. And sometimes it's like hard to balance that because, like I said, we're figuring it out as we go. But like you said, it's empowering when you see that happening, when you get to the other side and you're like, high five to myself for not losing it over something that maybe we grew up with seeing, where people overreacted, and there wasn't the safety to just make a mistake. And I think that's a big learning curve for us when we're parenting our kids. It's like these kids have to learn through their mistakes.
Mhm.
We have to allow them character building.
Yeah.
So a little bit of what we're talking about when you're sharing parenting the kids and the different ways that parenting your son versus your daughters, and all three of them, they're their own people. And I think that's another thing that we're learning is sometimes we grew up with being parented the exact same way, but what my brother needed versus what I needed versus
Oh,
what my
yeah.
sister needed were different. And it's also hierarchy, the oldest, the middle, the youngest. And so I'm sure you're learning that as well with these guys and what, where they're at. But then there's also this piece about mental health. And we've been kind of talking about it as we've been going along, and I thought maybe we can move to the connection of grief and mental health. But before we do that, if there's anything you wanted to leave with parenting your kids, whether it's through grief or just in general as we're learning about breaking barriers, if there's anything else that comes to mind before we move to grief and mental health.
Yeah, I guess the only other thing I would add about raising kids in general and also kids who are grieving is to sometimes just let go of control and let them lead the way. I think that when we do that, we end up learning so much from them. I learn from my kids every day, especially lately when I've had them sit and answer questions. And I don't tell them what I'm going to ask them. I tell them generally, like, we're going to talk about grief or how it shows up or losing your dad, but I don't tell them the specific questions that I'm going to ask them. So they're really on the spot answering some of these like heavy questions
Mm.
about their loss and their grief. And every time I sit down with them, I learn something new. I learn something new about them, the way they process, and then something that like I want to adopt and use for myself or something I need to be more aware of in my day. And we don't do it a lot because we want to fix and we want to heal and we want everything, we want to protect them. But I think sometimes letting them lead the way is just as healing and protective as like us doing it ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's so well said. Even if again we go back to our own upbringing, the kids were never meant to be seen or heard. You were a kid and you didn't have an opinion, and we had a lot of them. And if our
Mhm,
parents listened to some of them, maybe we would have had a different outcome.
mhm.
And I totally, totally agree with you. Like we are helping them by doing that, helping them figure out who they are and trusting that intuition that maybe not all of us, were allowed to trust either. And we very early on kind of were told, don't trust that, just listen to the adult, and the adult tells you what to do. And you share this, and literally yesterday there was like a situation between my younger son. He forgot to mention about a science project that was due over this little winter little reading break we had, and it was the day before he was back. And I learned through his friend who was visiting, who was like, oh, what do you mean you didn't do your project? So I got really upset, and I was like, okay, this is not okay, you have responsibility here. And so did the mom thing in front of his two friends. And my older son came up to me, and he came up to me when my younger son and his friends had left the kitchen. He came up to me privately, role modeled for me by gently saying, Mom, you really shouldn't have done that in front of his friends. Like, that's something that you could have pulled him aside. Like, literally was doing it with me in the way that he wished instead of yelling it across the room to me. And so at first I was in my reactive. I was like, well, it is what it is, blah, blah, blah. And then I like took a moment and was like, oh, okay. And, said, thank you for that. And you're right. I
Mhm.
appreciate that. And so then that made me go back and, say to my son and his friends, listen, you guys, I'm sorry that you guys have your own moms that you have to hear from. Like, I'm sorry you were here when this happened, and pulled my younger son aside and kind of worked it out with him and said, listen, like, how can we pause so you can enjoy the next hour that you have with these guys? And then we'll get to your project and we'll do it together. And I pulled my older son aside again later in the evening and I said, I've been thinking a lot about this today. And I just want to thank you because you taught me in by showing me how valuable that is. And I think that's going to sit with me now. I'm hoping the next time something like this comes up. And sometimes we don't, we didn't get that opportunity, the apology or the going back and forth and allowing it. And these guys, they know a lot more about our family dynamics than sometimes
Mhm.
we ourselves see. And
Mhm.
so when you share that, I think, yeah, like we do have to allow them to build their voice and allow them to do the thing that they're trying to do, which is figure out this world. That I think that's probably like the kindest way to be protective of them, is to allow the space, like you said, versus
Mhm.
taking it away from them. So
Yeah.
I love that you shared that.
And
So
I love that you shared that because that's like all of it in real life example.
yeah, it was kind, right? It's just like, oh, okay, great. Thank you for that. And next time I'll accept it even better, I hope, than in the moment of, oh, right. But yeah, I was like, he's so smart. Like,
Yeah.
to just know how to role model that in the moment. And that's the thing with these guys, like you said, they teach us better than we can do it often,
Yeah. They teach us
and
and they check us.
also that.
Yeah.
Yeah, also that. So, I wanted to kind of shift gears a little bit. We talk about grief and loss of a person, a loved one. And then there's this like other part of grief. And you and I are around-ish the same age, and I would imagine you're probably in this state too. But like one of the things I've noticed in my own work, in definitely personally, is how tightly grief and mental health are connected. And so
Mhm.
it's like not just emotional, it's physical, it's spiritual, all of it. And sometimes it's even hidden behind anxiety, irritability, exhaustion. And so I'm curious for you, how do you see, maybe for people tuning in today who sometimes feel disconnected from the fact that maybe they're grieving something, the loss of their youth, the loss of that chapter, the time, things, even when you and I talk about things we didn't get as kids, we are in some ways grieving some of that too, and we're learning how to manage that. And so what would you say to those that see grief showing up in mental health, but maybe don't know how to manage that, or don't think, oh, this anxiety could be because of this loss, or this is anxiety? So if there's something that maybe you would share in what's worked for you, or how you recognize the connection between grief and mental health.
Yeah. I think it really comes down to what we talked about earlier, giving ourselves the time and the space to be still because we all have our higher self, our intuition, um, our inner knowing that guides us and speaks to us, but we can't hear that if we're constantly moving and distracting ourselves from that voice. And that's been I'm at a point now where I don't even know how to separate grief and mental health. I think they're almost like just the same or similar where they affect both and you can't heal one without healing the other.
Okay.
And so that's come from spending a lot of time just being on my own and listening to my heart and really learning what's coming up in my body and then processing it and learning more about how that relates to my grief and affects my mental health. So I don't have like this formula or, algorithm or this like step by step process that I can
Thank
tell.
you.
Yeah. I mean, there isn't. And it's, healing is not a one size fits all. So it's hard to tell someone what to do exactly to start to work through their grief.
Yeah.
Um, it really comes down to just being still. And I always say, just come back to your breath. We teach that in yoga, and I teach that with my kids. And, everybody, if you're feeling overwhelmed by anything, you're going to hear someone say, take a deep breath. And it's true. Take a deep breath, quiet your mind, be still, turn off all the distractions, and just sit and feel the feelings, actually feel them. And it starts to tell you more about your grief and your mental health. And I did that probably several months after losing Sean is when I started to really sit with myself and sit with my grief. And that's when I could connect like the emotion with the trigger.
Mhm.
And there's an example I'll share. I was on a holiday trip soon after, so just 3 months after he died, and we were with other family, and we were in Mexico. And there was a night when we all left each other. We were with all our family and friends. We went back to our rooms, and I just started crying, and I couldn't figure it out. And I spent probably 30 minutes just sitting quietly while the kids went to bed, trying to figure out what in that moment caused me to feel that way. And I realized it was being around other couples. I was jealous. That's the first time I felt jealous after losing him. And it's the first time that I recognized it and told myself, this is what it is. And I accepted it. I let myself feel it. I let myself figure out why I was feeling it. And then I moved forward. So I think that's really all it takes is just
Mhm.
giving yourself that time.
Yeah, that's like so well said. That's a lot, hey? Like
It's a
to
lot.
when you sit with it, to trust yourself in that, okay, I can handle this, I can manage this, because to go through those feelings and especially a feeling like jealousy, that's something that has so much stigma built around it, and we really don't like to go there. We don't like to admit it. We feel it. We even do some weird things and get passive aggressive about it, but we won't go ahead and address it. And like kudos to you for meeting it and going there, because your reality would be that you're going to be in these situations moving forward for the rest
Mhm.
of your life, as will your kids. And so that feeling is going to come up, I would imagine, as much as it's going to come up every time you're around someone or watch a movie or something that involves a family or a couple. And so that it's giving yourself permission to say it's fair to feel this way, and then B, going ahead and working through it. And I think sometimes that's what happens, is like that disconnect of everything's fine, but then you get flooded with these emotions, and then it's hard to connect the dots to, this is connected to my well-being, and it is, I'm grieving something and it's impacting my mental health and the longevity if we're not addressing it as it comes. Like another, another study I was reading, it's like this Danish cohort of another long term, so a group, I think it was like just under 10,000 people were followed for, I think, 10 years, and they
Mm.
had lost a close relative or parent or family member, even a child. And they also examined their grief trajectories and how people evolved or didn't, and connected it to their mental health and physical health outcomes. And the people with high and persistent grief were twice as likely to die early. And they had higher rates of depression, anxiety, lots of use of psychiatric medications, and then many reported a long term of physical symptoms like fatigue, inflammation, chronic pain. And so grief, the way I read that was like grief had literally like colonized their body, literally settled in, and they had to either accept that now or didn't even recognize that, or for some they had to like have this battle with this grief within of like, okay, let it out. And I think that's the thing, is that it hides, it goes to
Mhm.
these places within us. And going back to the beginning of a conversation about movement and yoga and stretching and these sorts of things that you were talking about, really somatic breathing, all these sorts of things really impact how we move that through our body,
Mhm.
or it overrides and takes over. And I'm not sure if there's anything that comes to mind for you or that maybe you want to add to that.
Yeah, it's the body remembers what the mind forgets or tries to forget. So it's not a surprise that studies show that the ones who didn't face their grief and manage their grief,
Yeah.
it started to show up in their bodies. Movement, emotions are energy in motion. So that's why we hear more now that, 10 minutes of a walk outside has been shown to reduce anxiety. And that's so simple, just to get outside and walk for 10 minutes, but we don't realize that. And again, we don't give ourselves that attention and that time.
Yeah. And I think sometimes we think, well, and like kind of like exercise and must see results mode of like 10 minutes isn't going to do anything, is not going to make me fit. I got to go on the treadmill, or I got to run 20 kilometers. So who cares about I don't have time to do that. So then 10 minutes is going to do nothing. But you're right, like the impact and what it could do. It can get in the way to help you make a drastic decision. Like if you just take that 10 minutes and work through whatever, and the five senses of feeling the sun or the wind or whatever your environment has before you, just feeling that on your skin even, and
Mhm.
smell, and all our getting kind of in touch with our five senses makes a huge difference. And so I think that's like probably one of the best coping mechanisms out there, of we all have the capacity to have some kind of movement that can help us get it through, versus storing it within, and then it's going to show up at 5 minutes, 20 minutes,
Mhm.
5 years, whenever from now, and it can be so harmful and toxic. I was talking to someone recently who had a therapy session, and there was a lot of trauma that they had been holding for years, of a particular incident that happened to them, and they started to open up about this in therapy. And we were talking about it, and they're like, isn't it fitting that I woke up this morning so ill? And they
Mhm.
physically were so sick and couldn't go to work. And we were talking about, like, those are the toxins literally coming out because you opened a door to address something so bravely, and your body is like letting it go now. And that those sick toxins of what you've been storing in for years and years and years. So no, yeah, no wonder you're so ill today. And then they're like, and now I have to have this like war in my brain about just allowing myself to lay with a blanket for the day and rest.
Mhm.
Right? Because it's like automatic, I got to do something, I got to clean, or I got to do something, and I'm like, good luck.
Yeah.
Because that is the reality for so many. Just stay busy, stay busy, stay
Yeah.
distracted.
Yeah, I actually I hold a healing circle for survivors of suicide loss, and we meet for an hour and a lot of us share. And whenever I start it with a breathing exercise to ground us, and then at the end I always remind everybody to take a sip of water and to get outside and move their body, because it is a lot. You're sitting and you're sharing and you're reliving. And then if you don't, a lot of us go from this to the, to the phone and then back again. And we don't give ourselves that transition time to
Mhm.
move that energy around. So yeah, it just sits in you then. So, and I do that too, especially after podcast conversations. I will immediately, like, that's what I'm doing today. After we talk, I'm going to go to the gym, or I'll go outside and just like barefoot, get some sun on my face.
Yeah, exactly. The transition that you brought up, that time is so, so important throughout the day to have moments of that. And another thing that you're right, we just go from one thing to the other, and then we're like, why am I so burnt out? Or
Yeah.
why am I not able to, cope with this basic thing? And I'm having such big feelings towards it. And so these are all signs. I just want to just sort of reflect with you for a minute. Like, in this last couple years of going through this loss and working through it with your kids and learning about yourself, what do you, I know maybe this sounds weird, but
It's
where else to be weird
okay.
than
I
here?
like weird.
Uh,
We're weird.
but like, what would you say is something maybe you've gained from the grief and the loss of your husband that you wouldn't have otherwise?
It's funny. I've said this before. I feel like my world has gotten so much bigger since I lost my husband. And I say that because I have now learned to value every single relationship
Mhm.
in my circle, outside of my circle, everybody that comes into my life. If we create a relationship, I try to give it as much attention as I can and really hold gratitude for that relationship and that person. And so we connect so much more with friends and family. There are so many times when I don't want to do something on a Friday night, but family or friends will invite us and I'll do it. And then, of course, you always go and you have a great time. But I've learned who my people are, and I've just tried to cherish those relationships a lot stronger. So I think loss somehow teaches you how to love harder
Mm,
and live lighter, right? And fuller.
that's really well said. Maybe a thought for people with us today. Like, what do you want to leave with them on sitting with grief rather than running from it?
Yeah. I mean, I think like as we've been talking, I've been reflecting a lot about what we talked about during our first conversation. Like that was months ago. And I'm like reflecting on my own growth since we last spoke. And it's just reminding me that grief is an ongoing journey and it's not a lateral one. There are
Yeah.
going to be highs and lows, and you just have to go with it. And every day, every moment, every anniversary or special date is going to look different. So I would encourage anyone who's listening who is on their own grief journey to once again give yourself grace,
Mhm.
be gentle with yourself, and just know that healing is possible even when you don't feel like it is. It is possible because I feel like since I last talked to you and now I've done even more healing. I've done even more work and I've seen it in my kids. I see their lights are shining brighter too.
Yeah, I think that's so well said. And I mean, for me, like an observation is last time Sean had a lot of space in the conversation. And today I hear the space shifting to you and the
Mhm.
kids and, your world and what you guys are making of it. And both, all is important, I would imagine. But what that tells me is that you guys are learning how to live with the loss of Sean, as well as learning to live with the fact that you are all here, and what's that world going to entail for the four of you. And I think to me, like, that's huge. That's huge because it's moving through the process and not staying in one place. And yeah, maybe it'll come up again. As you said, it's not linear last time. But I hear that in the way that I heard hope last time too, and I definitely hear it today, but I just hear like there's life to the four of you in a bit of a different way than maybe last time. And so I'm excited for you four and the good, the bad, the ugly that you're working
Mhm.
through together.
Thank you.
Middle fingers up. Anything?
Yeah, I don't know what I have to say today. Middle fingers up. What did we say last time? I think I did a middle fingers up to
One second.
stigma around mental health. So I guess, well, I mean, you're the only host who's ever asked me that. I would say probably just to silence, just middle fingers up to silence. Let's share and keep sharing and listening.
I appreciate that. I agree with you. Absolutely. Okay, my friend, thank you. Thank you for coming on episode 128. Thank you for coming on today. Thank you for you and your kids sharing your story on the socials and allowing us to be part of that and take what we can about grief. And if people haven't started following you, if new people are listening for the first time, where can they find you if they want to reach out to you or join along your journey?
Yeah, Instagram's probably the best place. So I'm sure you'll put that in the notes. They can reach me there.
Perfect. And for everyone, we always say these conversations are door openers. We're just scratching the surface. This is why we keep having these conversations. Every time we show up on a conversation like grief, we're going to add to it. We're going to build from the last conversation. And we also understand that grief it's not simple. It's never the same for any two people. But maybe today, talking with Reshma reminds all of us that it is possible to be compassionate. It is possible to build courage from the process of grief. And we can do it all with intention and purpose. And it's not just about what we've lost, it's also about what we carry forward. And
Mhm.
there's love, there's lessons, and a whole lot of awareness. So if you have thoughts about this conversation, if you have questions, you know where to find us. We always want to keep that door open and build off of these conversations. So thank you so much, Reshma, for coming on. Thank you to everyone else for being part of this conversation. Any last words before we say see you next time?
No, I just want to tell you I'm really grateful for you and our friendship. And I just love that you are holding space for such real conversations. It's so needed.
Oh, I
So well
appreciate that.
done, you.
Yay, thank you. And please, I know I've never met them, but send my love to your kids. Tell
I
them that I learned so much when they shared, you know, little tidbits of their story, and I hope that they keep doing it.
Oh, thank you. I'll tell them.
Awesome. Thank you.